Hi, Mr. Paddy, what's up and welcome back to the yet another video of English with Vriddhi Doshi. Hi everyone, I'm your English educator Vriddhi Doshi and welcome back to There is Another Sky, the next poetry of your syllabus by Emily Dickinson. Before I move on with the session, let me give you all a quick introduction of what the poetry is about. Now, Emily Dickinson is one of the very few poetesses who gained a lot of popularity in that time. Female poets were not very popular during the time when it was written. This work, There is Another Sky, was also published posthumously. Posthumously means that it was published after Emily Dickinson died. So this poetry is one hell of a poetry, an interesting poetry, one of the most beautiful poetries, because we usually see that the poetries are written to a lover, written to a wife, written to a beloved. But this poetry specifically shows the bond between a sister and a brother. It shows the love that a sister has for her brother. So Emily Dickinson writes this entire poetry, but that's not actually a poetry. This is a letter. Absolutely correct. So she hides a letter in a poetry, and this letter is written to her brother Austin. Austin lives in Amherst and Emily Dickinson lives in Boston. So Emily is very far away from her brother. She misses her brother deeply and she wishes he comes back sooner. So she writes this poetry, There is Another Sky. This entire poetry is a metaphorical poetry. So what is a metaphor? A metaphor is basically a figure of speech in which you compare two nouns without using the words like or as. So for example, if I say, oh my darling, you're so beautiful. You're a flower in disguise. So when I say that you're a flower in disguise, I'm actually saying that you're a flower. Now, do you have petals? Do you have leaves? Do you have the bright pink color petals coming out of you? No, right? You don't have any of those things. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to associate you with all the adjectives. So for example, you're delicate, you're beautiful, you're kind, you're humble, all these other cute adjectives. I'm trying to associate you with that. So when I say you're a flower, I'm directly comparing you with a flower. So if I say Lencho is an ox of a man, so I am saying what? Lencho is like an ox, right? Lencho is hardworking, Lencho is dedicated. So Lencho is an ox of a man. So I'm saying Lencho is an ox. Now he doesn't have those horns on his head. No, na? I am trying to associate adjectives with Lencho. All the adjectives that are the adjectives of an ox. So for example, he is very hardworking, dedicated, right? So such examples are examples of a metaphor. Suppose if I say Lencho is like an ox, if I use the word such as like or as, it becomes an indirect comparison and then it becomes your simile. But when I say Lencho is an ox of a man, direct comparison, without using words such as like or as, it becomes a metaphor. So this entire poetry, There is Another Sky, is a metaphorical poetry where Emily Dickinson is saying that, hey my dear brother Austin, now these all things are not written in your textbook. So I would suggest you to write it down in your separate notebook and make a mind map of it. It will definitely help you when you're revising your entire poetry. So this entire poetry, There is Another Sky, Emily Dickinson writes it in a metaphorical format. She tells her brother, she requests her brother, she pleads her brother that, brother, Austin, come back to me. I miss you a lot. Come back to me, come back over here, come back to my house where I will create a small little world for you. That world, Austin, that world is going to be so perfect that there will be no imperfections. That world will be evergreen. And that world is my world of love. I'm going to fill you with so much love that there will never be any unhappiness that you feel in Boston. So there is another sky. That means there is another world. A world which has all my love in it. Who is my over here? Emily. all of Emily's love inside of it, where there is no darkness and there is only and only evergreen shine. So she is missing her brother a lot and she is persuading him to come back to her. She is missing him a lot, and so she writes this letter. So there is another sky, ever serene and fair. There is another sunshine, though it be darkness there. Never mind faded forests, Austen, never mind silent fields. Here is a little forest whose leaf is evergreen. Here is a brighter garden where not a frost has been. In its unfading flowers, I hear the bright bee hum. Prithee, my brother, into my garden come. So as you can see, into my garden come. Brother Austen, come back. My dear brother, my dear darling, my dear love, Prithee. My brother, come back to me, come back to my house, come back to where we were, how we were little kids. We used to love each other so much. So there is another sky, there is a different world. Over here, another sky is referred to a different world which is not in Boston. It is in Amherst where Emily is staying. So there is another sky, there is another world. It is serene, it is very calm, tranquil, it is very peaceful. It is fair. It is just, it is right. Yes, there is another sunshine. There is another world over there in Boston that you have. You have another world over there. You have another life over there. And sometimes it will be darkness over there. But when you come over here, when you come into my world, when you come outside the hut in which I'm staying, Emily says, when you will come over here to Amherst, you will see that, okay, outside my house, there are forests. There are forests that have faded. There are very faded means they are less. There are less forests. But don't mind that. Don't mind the forest. Don't mind the dark forests that are outside my house. Don't mind the fields that are outside my house. The large gardens. They are very silent. Please don't mind it, Austen. Because apart from that as well, there is going to be another world. That is going to be my world. And this little forest is my world. This little forest is Emily's world of love. Where the leaf is evergreen, that means that it is always green. The atmosphere is always green. There is always greenery, which means that there is always going to be happiness. There is not going to be a single sight of a black leaf or a dark leaf which shows unhappiness. So in my forest of love, you will have a lot of greenery, a lot of love. This is a brighter garden, brighter than the one outside, brighter than the physical garden, brighter than Boston. This is my little forest. This is my little forest of love. That is what is Emily telling to her brother. She also says that the garden, the world that I have is so much filled with love that there is not a frost. That means that there is no snowfall. It never gets cold over here. There is not a single time where a flower has dulled or a flower has gone dead. The flowers are always very bright. The flowers are always blooming, which shows that there is always going to be happiness. It is so tranquil, it is so beautiful that you can hear the bright bees, you can hear the humming of the bees, you can hear the sound of the bees. And there is so much happiness over and above. My dear Austen, you're going to get my love. You will get all my love. You will get all my happiness. I will never let a single moment of sadness in you. That is what is Emily trying to tell her brother. So she tells him that Prithee means my dear brother. In Old English, Prithee means my little brother, my dear brother. So Prithee, my dear brother, my little brother, come into my garden, come into my world, come into my house, come to Amherst. I miss you. This garden, this little forest is evergreen. It's always going to be filled with happiness. There will be no sadness. Boston may have some sadness over there. You may have the perils of life. But over here, in my house, in my world, in my sky of love, you will never find any unhappiness. The last line, into my garden come. Emily Dickinson very nicely uses an inversion along with an exclamation. Two figures of speech, inversion and an exclamation. Exclamation shows to put more emphasis on the idea, and an inversion puts a more poetic effect. So this is how she adds more stress onto the feeling that, my dear brother Prithvi, come back into my world where I will give you so much love. There is so much happiness, you will never be sad. There is another analogy, there's a biblical reference in this poem. Whose leaf is ever green where not a frost has been. It's unfading flowers. These three lines show, these three lines have a biblical reference where we are comparing, where Emily Dickinson is comparing her world to the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden is basically in the Bible. Garden of Eden has a very significant importance. It shows that time has stopped. Garden of Eden is a garden where the time is not running at all, it's just stopped. So if a flower is blooming, it will bloom throughout. It will never go dull, it will never die. Time has stopped. So Emily Dickinson is trying to compare her world to Garden of Eden, where there is only and only happiness. Time has stopped, there is no unhappiness, there is no sadness, and there is only and only love that she has. So this is how Emily Dickinson very beautifully conveys or portrays her love for her brother. Unfortunately, Austen never got this letter because this letter was never published until after her death. However, the world saw one of the brightest poetries in the form of one of the brightest letters in the form of a poetry. I just said it the other way around. A letter in the form of poetry after Emily Dickinson died, and this is one of the classic poetries, There Is Another Sky by Emily Dickinson. I really hope that this poetry was super interesting to all of y'all. I simplified it as much as I could. If y'all still have any questions, please feel free to put out in the comment box below, and I'm going to now see y'all in the next class. If y'all have any questions, definitely y'all can ask me in the next class. And until then, stay at home, stay safe, take very good care of yourself, and a very hearty sayonara. See you in the next class, guys, and don't forget to tell your siblings how much you love them. After all, there is another sky. Prithvi, my brother, into my garden come. Sayonara, take care, and see you soon. Bye, guys. Take care.